The conference room hummed with polite laughter and the clinking of coffee cups, but I barely heard any of it. My phone vibrated on the table. I glanced down. Ryan. My husband. I excused myself with a smile, slipping into the hallway, expecting the usual check-in. Hey, babe. How's the conference? When are you flying back? That's what I thought I'd hear. Instead, his voice was sharp. Cold. Almost smug. I'm divorcing you. I froze. What? My voice came out steady, but my heart was pounding. I've already sold the condo, he continued, like he was reading off a checklist. So, you'll need to figure out where you're going to live. Good luck with that. There was a pause. I waited for him to laugh, say he was joking. But all I heard was his breath, calm and deliberate. He meant it. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. You sold the condo? Without telling me? Yeah, he said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. Sophie and I need the cash to get started on our place. She deserves better than that cramped two-bedroom anyway. Sophie. The name sliced through me. I had suspected for months, the late work nights, the sudden weekend trips, the emotional distance that had stretched so far between us it felt like a canyon. But hearing her name out loud? Hearing him speak it so casually, like I was the outsider intruding on their perfect life? It was like he had taken a blade to my chest and twisted it. But I didn't break. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I swallowed hard and forced out the words. Sounds good. There was a long silence, like he was waiting for me to scream or beg. When I didn't, he let out a low chuckle. Glad you're being mature about this, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Click. He hung up. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the phone like it might explode in my hand. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. My fingers were trembling, but I tucked my phone into my blazer pocket, smoothed down my skirt, and walked back into that conference room like nothing had happened. I smiled at the clients. I laughed at their jokes. But inside? Inside, I was unraveling. Ryan and I had been together for 6 years. We built a life together, or at least I thought we had. That condo in Capitol Hill? That wasn't just real estate. It was ours. The place I fell in love with the second we stepped inside. The hardwood floors creaked, but I adored them. The windows overlooked the city, and every morning, we'd drink coffee and watch the fog roll over Seattle like a blanket. I thought it was our future. Turns out, it was just my dream. He had been planning his exit for months, maybe even longer. And Sophie? She wasn't just some fling. She was his future. He was building a life with her while I was holding on to the scraps of a marriage that had already burned to the ground. But here's the part Ryan didn't know, the part that made my lips curl into the faintest smile, even as my heart cracked open. The condo was in my name. Had been for months. We refinanced earlier in the year, and I had the title transferred solely to me. Ryan, in his usual careless way, had signed the paperwork without reading it. He thought he was so clever, so in control. But he never paid attention to the details. He never thought I was capable of moving without his permission. That was his mistake. And it was going to be his downfall. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Meetings. Handshakes. Fake smiles. But beneath it all, a new feeling began to stir inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Power. I wasn't going to crumble. I wasn't going to let Ryan bulldoze me out of my home, out of my life. He thought he was taking everything from me. But he was wrong. When I got back to my hotel room that night, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared out the window at the city lights. I thought about that morning, about who I was before that call. And then I thought about who I was now. I wasn't the same woman anymore. Ryan wanted a fight? Fine. But this time I was going to win. Have you ever had someone try to rip your world apart like that, like they thought you were nothing? What did you do? Comment 111 if you think Ryan is the one who's about to get what he deserves. I didn't sleep that night. After Ryan's call, after I sat in that sterile hotel room in San Francisco pretending to review my notes for the conference, my mind refused to rest. His voice kept replaying, so confident, so casual, as if he was discussing the weather. I'm divorcing you. I sold the condo. Sophie deserves better. That smug certainty he had, it made my stomach twist. But underneath the shock and the anger, something heavier settled over me. A kind of grief that went beyond losing a home. Beyond losing a husband. It was the grief of realizing I had built my entire life around someone who never valued me the way I valued him. I stared at the ceiling as the memories came flooding back, pulling me to a time when I thought Ryan was my future. I was 24 when we met. I had just moved to Seattle, wide-eyed and eager to carve out my place in the world. I was working as a junior marketing associate at a small firm, barely making enough to cover my half of the rent in a rundown apartment I shared with 2 roommates. I wasn't thinking about love, but then there was Ryan, charismatic, driven, with that easy charm that made you believe he was going places. We met at a networking event downtown. He was pitching his startup idea to anyone who would listen. He had this spark in his eyes when he talked about his future, how he was going to build something big, something that mattered. I admired that. I admired him. Our first date was at a small Italian place in Capitol Hill. He couldn't really afford it, but he insisted. We split a bottle of wine, and he talked about his dreams. I listened, captivated, imagining our future together, building something side by side. Back then, his ambition felt like security. I thought we'd be unstoppable. I was wrong. The first year was good, really good. We laughed a lot. He made me feel seen, like I was part of his success story even before it began. When he told me he was quitting his job to focus on his startup full-time, I didn't hesitate. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop I worked at on weekends. I covered rent when his savings ran out. When he felt defeated after yet another investor passed, I stayed up with him, talking him down, telling him he was brilliant and that someone would see it soon. But the years passed, and the victories never came. His startup failed. We drained what little savings we had. I took on more work, marketing by day, barista by night, while he figured things out. I told myself it was temporary. That's what partners do. We support each other. We sacrifice for the dream. But the dream became mine alone. My life turned into long days and longer nights. I'd come home at midnight, my legs aching, to find him on the couch playing video games. The sink would be full of dishes. The laundry overflowing. I'd cook dinner, sometimes just grilled cheese, because it was all we could afford. I'd pack his lunch for the next day even though he wasn't working. And when I finally sat down, he'd barely look up from his screen. No thank you. No, how was your day? Just a mumbled cool when I told him I landed a new client. I told myself he was stressed. That he needed time. That my love would be enough for both of us. But love doesn't keep you warm when you crawl into bed alone every night. When we finally saved enough for the down payment on the condo, I was the one who pushed for it. That 2-bedroom in Capitol Hill was my dream. I fell in love with the big windows, the way the afternoon sun lit up the kitchen. I imagined us hosting friends, raising kids there. I poured my savings into it, every last dollar from those endless shifts. Ryan signed the papers, but he didn't even read them. He called it our home, but it was my money that made it ours. He didn't care about the details, he trusted me with the boring stuff. That's what I told myself. But the truth? He just didn't care. The indifference crept in slowly, so quietly I didn't notice at first. He forgot our anniversary 1 year. Then the next. Work trips started popping up, weekends away with old college buddies. I'd text him I miss you, and he'd reply, busy. Talk later. Later rarely came. I once spent a week planning his birthday, made reservations at his favorite steakhouse, bought him the new watch he'd been eyeing. He came home late that night, drunk, muttered something about, "Thanks, babe," and passed out on the couch. But the moment that broke me? The night I stayed up until 2 a.m., helping him polish his pitch deck for a new investor meeting. I knew how much it meant to him. He said this was his shot. I worked on that deck like it was my own future on the line. The next day, he nailed the pitch. He came home beaming, told me the investors were impressed. I waited for him to say it. Just 2 simple words. "Thank you." He didn't. He kissed me on the cheek and asked what was for dinner. I wish I could say I left then. That I saw him for who he really was. But I didn't. I swallowed the hurt and told myself this was what commitment looked like. That you hold on even when it hurts. Looking back now, I see it so clearly. Our life was never a partnership. It was me holding everything together while he took the credit. His confidence wasn't strength, it was carelessness. He believed he could treat me like I was disposable because he thought I would always be there to pick up the pieces. That's why he thought he could sell my home out from under me and walk away with Sophie like I was nothing. But he underestimated me. Just like he always had. I stared out the hotel window, the San Francisco skyline glowing beneath me. The woman I had been when I met Ryan would have crumbled under the weight of this betrayal. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I had built that life. That condo. That future. And now, I was going to take it all back. Have you ever given everything to someone, your time, your love, your dreams, only to realize they never truly valued you? Comment 222 if you've ever felt underappreciated like I did. I returned to Seattle 3 days after that call. The flight had given me time, too much time, to think, to dissect every word Ryan had said, every smirk I could hear through the phone. I stepped into my condo with a strange sense of ownership I hadn't felt in years. I dropped my suitcase by the door and looked around. His shoes were still scattered by the entryway. His coat hung lazily over the back of the chair, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I made coffee and stood by the window, staring out over Capitol Hill, the skyline of Seattle stretching beyond. This view had been my dream. I'd fought for this place, worked overtime, drained my savings, all for us. For a future that, apparently, only I believed in. Ryan hadn't just sold our marriage, he'd tried to sell this place, the one thing I thought we built together. But it wasn't his to sell. And that truth, that power, was mine now. I didn't see him that night. He texted once, something casual like, "Hey, won't be home tonight. Staying with Sophie." Sophie. As if I needed the reminder. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The next day, I focused on work. I buried myself in emails and client calls, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But in the back of my mind, there was a steady hum, a low, growing anger, like an engine revving, waiting to be unleashed. Then, on Wednesday afternoon, everything snapped. I was sitting in my office when my phone lit up with a message from Karen, our next-door neighbor. "Hey. I thought you should know. I saw Ryan on the balcony with someone. They'd been there all afternoon. Sorry if it's none of my business, but it didn't seem right." Attached was a photo. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding in my chest. There they were, Ryan and Sophie, standing on my balcony, sipping wine, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. She was wearing my sweater. The cream cashmere one Ryan had given me for Christmas 3 years ago, back when I still believed he cared. It looked better on me. My fingers shook, but not from sadness. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was rage. I closed my laptop and left the office without a word. The drive home was a blur. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, my breath coming fast. I didn't know what I would say, or what I would do. But I knew I couldn't let this stand. Not anymore. When I stepped into the condo, the first thing I saw was the vase. Or what was left of it. Shattered glass and porcelain scattered across the hardwood floor. My grandmother's vase, the last gift she ever gave me before she passed away. She had brought it back from Italy, hand-painted, delicate, irreplaceable. I had always kept it on the side table by the window, a piece of her in my home. Now, it was broken. Destroyed. Sophie's purse sat on the couch. Ryan's keys were tossed on the counter. Their wine glasses were still half full. They were comfortable here, in my home, like I was the intruder. I heard laughter from the bedroom. My bedroom. Something snapped inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My heart slowed, my breathing steadied. This wasn't devastation. This was clarity. I was done. I had spent 6 years loving a man who didn't deserve it. I had carried the weight of his failures, sacrificed my time, my money, my dreams, all for him. And this was my reward. He had taken everything I gave and tossed it aside like it was worthless. But he had made a mistake. He thought he could take this condo. He thought he could take my dignity. He thought I was weak. He was wrong. I gathered the shards of the vase carefully, cutting my fingers on the edges, but I didn't stop. I wrapped the pieces in a towel and placed them in a box. My grandmother had been a fighter. She had left her small town in Georgia at 17 with nothing but a suitcase and a stubborn heart. She built her life from the ground up. She had taught me that a woman's strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet refusal to break. Ryan was about to learn that lesson. They didn't see me when they left the bedroom. Sophie's laugh faded the moment our eyes met. She had the decency to look embarrassed. Ryan, on the other hand, had the audacity to smile. "Oh, hey. You're home early," he said, as if this were normal. I didn't respond. I looked at Sophie. "You're wearing my sweater." She flushed and pulled at the hem. Sorry, I didn't." "Take it off." Ryan scoffed. "Jesus, Emily, don't be dramatic." I stepped forward, voice low, steady. "This is my home. That's my sweater. And you are not welcome here." Sophie peeled off the sweater, her eyes darting nervously. She handed it to me, standing there awkwardly in her tank top. "I think we should go," she muttered to Ryan. He smirked. "Fine. But this isn't over." I smiled. "No, it's not." They left, and the door clicked shut behind them. I locked it. Then I changed the locks. I sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at the legal deed in my name. I thought about that first year with Ryan, the nights I stayed up, working extra shifts so he could chase his dream. I thought about the times I covered rent, bought groceries, cleaned the apartment while he networked over beers. I thought about the sacrifices I made, the love I poured into him, while he took and took and took. But this condo? This was mine. I paid for it. I secured it. And he couldn't take it from me. Ryan had won every small battle over the years, because I let him. But this? This was the war. And I was going to win it. The next morning, I called Rachel, my lawyer. "It's time," I said. She didn't need clarification. "Let's take him down." I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Ryan thought he had the upper hand. He thought he could humiliate me and walk away with my home and my pride. But he forgot something. The condo was mine. And I was going to make sure he regretted ever underestimating me. Have you ever reached a point where you just knew, you were done being stepped on? What was your breaking point? Comment 333 if you think it's time for Emily to fight back. The day after I kicked Ryan and Sophie out of my condo, my home, I woke up feeling different. Lighter, maybe. Clearer. But beneath that, a steely resolve had taken root. This was no longer about heartbreak. It wasn't even about anger. This was about power. Taking back what was mine. Ryan thought he'd blindsided me with that phone call in San Francisco. He thought he held all the cards. But what he didn't know, what he had never cared to know, was that I had been playing the long game without even realizing it. The condo he thought he had sold out from under me? It had been legally mine for months. He had no idea he was already losing. I pulled the folder from the bottom drawer of my desk, the paperwork from the refinancing we had done earlier that year. I had insisted on transferring the title into my name alone. I told Ryan it was just a better financial arrangement, easier for tax purposes. He hadn't questioned it. He never did. He had smirked, signed the forms without reading them, and went back to scrolling through his phone. That was Ryan, always confident, always careless. And now, that carelessness was going to be his downfall. The first call I made was to Rachel, my lawyer. She had been my friend long before she became my legal confidant. We met for coffee at a small cafe near her office, but this was not a friendly catch-up. "You're sure the sale is invalid?" I asked, my voice low but firm. Rachel nodded. "Absolutely. He doesn't own the property. Any agreement he made is fraudulent." That word, fraudulent, sent a spark through me. It was no longer just about divorce. Now, Ryan had walked into legal territory where I had the upper hand. "What's our next step?" "We need evidence. Everything you have, financials, emails, anything proving you're the sole owner. I'll handle notifying the buyer that the sale is void, but we need to be airtight. If Ryan wants to fight this, we need to bury him in facts." I left that cafe with a plan. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was in control. That night, I combed through 6 years of financial records, highlighting every bank transfer I had made for the down payment. Every bill I had paid. Every receipt with my name on it. Next, I scoured my email history and found the paper trail from the refinancing process, the emails where Ryan had asked me to handle it because he was too busy. The attachment showing his signature on the title transfer. And then, the final piece, security footage. Our building had cameras in the common areas, including the entrance and the elevators. I spoke to the building manager, a woman named Claire, who had always been kind to me. I told her there had been an issue with unauthorized visitors, and she was more than willing to help. When I saw the footage, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. There was Ryan, bringing Sophie into my home. Her hand in his. Her laugh as she stepped off the elevator like she belonged there. But the pain didn't break me this time. It fueled me. I saved the videos onto a flash drive. Piece by piece, I was assembling a fortress around myself, evidence that would not only protect me but destroy him if he dared push further. But here's the thing, I didn't let Ryan see a single crack in my armor. I replied to his texts with polite indifference. When he asked if I could be reasonable about the living situation, I simply said, "Of course, we can talk soon." When he called to check in, I answered with a calm, detached tone, as if we were old acquaintances discussing the weather. I knew it unnerved him. He was expecting tears, screaming, desperation. Instead, he got composure. And Ryan had no idea how to handle a woman he couldn't control. One evening, he dropped by unannounced. I opened the door and greeted him like he was a neighbor borrowing sugar. He glanced around the condo, the same space he had tried to strip from me, his eyes narrowing as if he sensed the shift but couldn't place it. "You're okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I smiled. "I'm great, Ryan. Just focusing on work." "How's Sophie?" He stiffened. That was the first moment I saw doubt flicker across his face. He thought he had left me broken. But what he saw was a woman he no longer understood. That night, after he left, I changed the locks. I had bought the new lock a week earlier, but I waited, because timing mattered. Power is not just having control, it's knowing when to reveal it. The new key slid into my hand with satisfying finality. This was my space now. He could rage, he could threaten, but he would never step through that door again unless I allowed it. Each day after that was a calculated performance. I smiled at work. I had drinks with friends. I posted photos of my hikes on social media, happy, thriving, unbothered. But every evening, I prepared. Rachel and I drafted the formal legal notice to Ryan, outlining the invalidity of the sale and the potential fraud charges he faced. I reviewed every document twice. I made copies. I secured them in my desk, my email, and a backup drive. There would be no loopholes. No surprises. Ryan thought he was moving freely, but he was walking straight into a trap I had built with my own hands. One afternoon, as I finalized the last set of papers, I looked around the condo, the sunlight spilling over the hardwood floors, the faint hum of the city outside. This place was no longer a symbol of our life together. It was a symbol of me. My strength. My independence. My refusal to be anyone's victim. Ryan had taken so much from me, my time, my trust, my love. But this? This was mine. And he would soon understand what it felt like to lose something you thought you had under control. As I closed the folder, I allowed myself a small smile. Ryan thought I was weak. What he didn't know was that I was already holding the winning hand. Have you ever had to stay silent, play along, while secretly building your escape plan? Comment 444 if you're ready to see me take back what's mine. The day the legal notice was delivered, I knew it had begun. Ryan received it in the morning, while I was at work. Rachel had emailed me to confirm the papers had been served, outlining the invalidity of the condo sale, my sole ownership, and the potential fraud charges he was now facing. I imagined the moment he opened the envelope, expecting maybe a simple divorce filing, only to find proof of his own stupidity staring back at him, every signature, every ignored document, every careless choice laid out like a map of his downfall. But I didn't hear from him right away. That was what surprised me. I thought he would call, screaming. Instead, silence. The kind that made me uneasy, like standing on a beach just before a storm rolls in. I knew it was coming. 2 days later, it happened. I was home, sipping coffee at the kitchen table, going over a client report, when I heard it, the furious pounding at my door. I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this. I opened it to find Ryan, his face flushed with rage, jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might snap. Sophie was behind him, her arms crossed, wearing sunglasses like she was trying to hide from the world, or from whatever disaster she knew was unfolding. You can't do this. Ryan's voice boomed as he shoved the papers in my face. This is bullshit. This is half mine. I took my time. I let him stand there in his anger, let him think he was still the one holding power over me. Then, I reached over to my desk and pulled out the deed, my name, printed clearly, undeniably, on the title. I held it up for him to see. This is mine, Ryan. It's been mine for months. You signed it over without even realizing it, remember? You thought you were smarter than me. You thought you could take everything. But you didn't even bother to read what you signed. His eyes darted across the paper, as if he could will it into saying something different. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered it. He stumbled over his words, his bravado cracking. And then, Sophie spoke. Her voice was sharp, but underneath it was panic. Wait, what? You told me you sold this place. You said you had the money. Where is it, Ryan? Her eyes narrowed behind her glasses, her mask of cool indifference slipping away. Ryan's face paled. There were complications, okay? It's not that simple. Sophie stepped back. Oh my God. You don't have the money? He reached for her arm, desperate now. Sophie, babe, listen. She yanked her arm away, like he was contagious. You lied. You said this was a done deal. You said we'd be moving into our new place by now. What have you done? Her voice was rising, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I stepped aside, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Watching. Ryan turned back to me, his eyes wild. Emily, please. We can work this out. Don't do this. There it was, the shift. The man who had called me from San Francisco, laughing about throwing me out, was now begging. I stayed calm, but every inch of me was drinking in this moment. You need to leave, I said, voice steady. You have 48 hours to get your things and get out. After that, I'll have the locks changed, again, and if you try to set foot in here, I'll call the police. And don't think for a second I won't press fraud charges if you make this any harder for me. His mouth opened, then closed. He turned to Sophie, looking for support, but she had already started backing toward the elevator. I'm not getting dragged into this mess, she spat. You're on your own, Ryan. And just like that, she was gone. The elevator door slid shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. Ryan slumped against the doorframe, his shoulders sagging under the weight of everything he had lost. He looked at me, not with anger anymore, but with something closer to disbelief. Like he was realizing, for the first time, I was stronger than he had ever given me credit for. Emily. I'm sorry. I screwed up, okay? I held up my hand, cutting him off. I don't need your apology, Ryan. I needed respect. I needed honesty. And you never gave me either. Now, I just need you gone. His eyes watered slightly, the last, desperate attempt to tug at my empathy, but it didn't work. Not this time. 48 hours, I repeated. After that, you're trespassing. He nodded, defeated. Okay. When he left, I closed the door and locked it. I pressed my back against it and took a deep breath. I had won. The next day, Rachel called to confirm the buyer had formally withdrawn from the sale, furious at Ryan for wasting their time and nearly dragging them into legal trouble. Any chance Ryan had at salvaging the deal was gone. The fraud accusations were real, and while I had no intention of pursuing criminal charges, unless he pushed me, he knew the risk was there. By the evening, Ryan had started moving his things out. There was no shouting, no final confrontation. He came and went quietly, his tail between his legs. On the second day, he left his key on the kitchen counter. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. That night, I stood in my living room, the same room where I had once envisioned our future together, and felt nothing but relief. The space finally felt like mine. Not ours. Not his. Mine. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the balcony, the same one where Ryan and Sophie had laughed together, thinking they had won. The city stretched out before me, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was mine to conquer. Ryan had taken so much from me, years of my life, my trust, my heart. But he couldn't take this home. And he would never again take my power. I had built this life. I had saved it. And now, I was finally free to live it. Have you ever watched someone who underestimated you realize, too late, that you were stronger than they ever imagined? Comment 555 if you think this is the justice Ryan deserved. The morning after Ryan left for good, I woke up to silence. Not the heavy, oppressive kind that had filled the condo in the final months of our marriage. This was different. This was peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up feeling like I had to walk on eggshells. I didn't brace myself for a dismissive comment or a passive-aggressive sigh from across the room. I stretched out in the middle of the bed, my bed now, and let the sunlight warm my face through the windows I had fought to keep. This space was mine. Truly mine. Over the next few weeks, I began the process of reclaiming it, not just legally, but emotionally. I started small. I threw out the old coffee table that Ryan had insisted on keeping, even though it was too bulky for the space. I donated the hideous gaming chair that took up half the living room. I replaced the generic wall art with paintings from a local artist I loved, pieces that made me feel calm, alive. Plants began to fill the corners, vibrant greens breathing life into spaces that had once felt stale. A soft blue rug stretched across the hardwood floors, and warm string lights draped above the windows. I rearranged the furniture, pushing the couch closer to the window so I could sip coffee every morning and watch the city wake up. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, the condo stopped feeling like the place where we had lived. It became the place where I thrived. And I was thriving. Work, which had always been my safe haven when things at home felt unstable, now became a place where I excelled. Without the constant emotional weight dragging me down, I threw myself into new projects, landed 2 major clients for the firm, and, 3 months later, I was offered a promotion to senior marketing manager. The day I signed the new contract, I took myself out to dinner. Alone. A table for one. I ordered the steak Ryan always said was too expensive, paired it with a glass of red wine, and toasted to myself. There was no one across from me, no one to seek approval from, and yet I felt more fulfilled than I had in years. For the first time, I realized I was enough, on my own. That summer, I booked a solo trip to Hawaii. It was something I had dreamed of for years, but every time I brought it up, Ryan had shot it down. Too expensive, he'd say. Maybe next year. Or my favorite, what's the point of going somewhere like that alone? But now? Now, there was no one to tell me no. I hiked along the Na Pali coast, feeling the sun on my back and the wind in my hair. I swam in clear blue waters, the ocean cradling me like it knew I needed this rebirth. I read books on the beach until the sun disappeared behind the waves. Each moment reminded me, I was capable. I was worthy. I was free. There were still hard days, of course. Healing is never linear. Sometimes I would find an old photo tucked into a drawer, Ryan and me smiling on a trip to California, or his handwriting scrawled on a leftover utility bill. And for a moment, grief would hit me. Not for the man he became, but for the man I thought he was. But the difference now was that those moments passed. They didn't pull me under anymore. About 6 months after he left, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized, but hadn't seen in a long time. Ryan. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, debating. Then, curiosity won. I answered. His voice was different, softer, like life had knocked the arrogance out of him. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. Hi, Emily. I hope it's okay that I called. I wanted to check in. See how you're doing. I could tell he was nervous, bracing for me to hang up. But I didn't. I'm doing well, I said, and I meant it. He exhaled. That's good. That's really good. Look, I know I have no right to ask, but can I be honest with you for a second? Sure. I'd been in therapy. Since everything. It's been hard, but I'm starting to understand some things. About myself. About the way I treated you. He paused. I'm so sorry, Emily. For everything. I was selfish. I took you for granted. I thought I was this big shot, and I wasn't. I was just scared. And instead of being grateful for you, I pushed you away. There was a time when those words would have cracked me wide open. When I would have clung to that apology, desperate to fix what was broken. But now? I listened, and I felt peace. I appreciate you saying that, Ryan, I said. And I did. He told me that Sophie had left him not long after our showdown. Things had fallen apart quickly. He had hit rock bottom. But losing everything had forced him to confront who he was, the man he had become. And while part of me still harbored anger for what he had done, I could also see his pain. His regret. People can change, I thought. But that didn't mean I needed him back. When we ended the call, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel bitter. I felt free. He was part of my past. But my future? That was mine. That night, I sat on my balcony, and watched the city lights shimmer. I thought about how far I had come from the woman who answered that phone call in San Francisco, heartbroken and blindsided. I had rebuilt my home. I had rebuilt my life. Most importantly, I had rebuilt myself. Have you ever come out of heartbreak stronger, realizing you didn't just survive, you thrived? Comment 666 if you believe women can rise stronger after heartbreak. Looking back now, I realize that my greatest victory wasn't keeping the condo, or watching Ryan face the consequences of his own arrogance. It wasn't even hearing him finally apologize, months later, for everything he had done. My biggest victory was taking back my power. For so many years, I let my worth be defined by my relationship. I measured my success by how well I supported Ryan, how much I contributed to our shared life, and how happy I could make him. I thought that was love, giving and giving, even when nothing came back. I thought that was what a strong woman did. But I was wrong. Strength isn't about sacrificing yourself to hold someone else together. Strength is knowing when to stop. It's realizing that you deserve more, and being brave enough to demand it. The moment I chose myself, the moment I stood in that doorway and told Ryan to leave, that was when I won. Not because I outsmarted him. Not because I got to keep the condo. But because I finally understood that I was enough on my own. There's something incredibly powerful about reclaiming your life after someone tries to tear it down. It's not easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep. There were mornings I woke up and felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. But every time I chose to keep going, every time I took another step forward, that was the real revenge. Because here's the truth. The best revenge isn't making them suffer. The best revenge is living so well they no longer matter. I know I'm not the only one who has been through this. I know there are women, maybe some of you watching this right now, who are still in that place of hurt, still wondering if you're strong enough to walk away. Let me tell you, you are. You are stronger than you think. You deserve more than someone who makes you question your worth. And you have the power to build a life that is yours, a life that makes you proud, with or without anyone else by your side. And maybe, like Ryan, the person who hurt you will grow. Maybe they'll change. Maybe they'll even apologize. But by then, it won't matter. Because you'll have already built something better. You'll have built yourself. So, now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to reclaim your power after betrayal? Have you ever had to choose yourself when someone else tried to make you feel small? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might read it and feel a little less alone. And if this story resonated with you, if you found strength in Emily's journey, or in your own, please consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to AGS Stories so you never miss a new story of resilience, growth, and triumph. Because at the end of the day, these stories, are what remind us that we're not alone. We're all fighting our battles. We're all finding our strength. And together, we rise.